Hello everyone and welcome to the latest GESS Talks webinar. We'd like to thank everyone for logging on and listening. A few bits of information before we get underway. For all attendees, you can find a control panel on the right-hand side. There's a Q&A tab, so please feel free to use that. Ask us questions. We'd love to hear your thoughts. We'll do our best to get through them all, but if we don't manage it, the system saves them down and we'll get back to you after the event. If you want to enjoy the webinar all over again, you can do so as we'll be uploading it to our YouTube channel soon after. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our chair and moderator for today, an amazing supporter and regular speaker at GESS events, Olly Lewis, Head of Digital Transformation at the Thomas Deacon Education Trust. He'll introduce the rest of the panel. Thank you, and over to you, Olly.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you to everybody that has tuned in, and whether you're listening live or whether you're watching the event back. Welcome to webinar number 10 in the GESS Talks GESS series. Please don't forget to use the hashtag GESS Talks, and a massive thank you to everybody in the GESS education space, everybody that supports GESS. You can find more information about GESS from their website, guessdubai.com, or by finding them on social media at GESS Education, if it's Twitter or Instagram, or at GESS Dubai on Facebook. I am absolutely over the moon and ecstatically excited to welcome today 4 educators I have huge respect for. They are involved in so many different things in education, and I can't wait to fire a whole host of questions around the theme of the evolution of education. Are we facing a future skills gap at them? Whilst the title is quite grand, it does touch on, I think, many different areas and facets of education that I hope we can discuss today. So without further ado, I'm going to invite each of the panelists to introduce themselves. So Natasha, if we could come to you first, please.
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. Lovely to be here and be invited. So I'm Natasha Hilton. I am currently the head of primary at Park House English School in Qatar. I'm also one of the strategic leads for Women Ed. We've got quite a big following, and then I'm also on the board of advisors for TESS and currently leading the networks for DEI, for BSME as well. So dabbling in a lot of things at the moment, but really happy to be here and be on this panel, and really interested in the conversations that we're going to have today.
Awesome. Thank you, Natasha. It's great to have you here. Kamil, if we can come to you next, please.
Hi everyone, such a pleasure to be here. I'm Kamil Majeed. I am the Principal and Chief Operating Officer of the Nordic International School in Lahore, Pakistan. It's a Swedish school and we go all the way from playgroup till year 8. So we have children literally from 3 years of age going all the way till 13 years. I've been associated with the UN Global Compact as well for the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals in Pakistan. Apart from that, I've been one of the British Council Future Leaders Connect members back in 2017 and 18, and I have a master's in education and international development from University College London.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Kamil, for joining us. Already 2 panelists in, and they're involved in so many amazing things. Morgan, if we could come to you next, please.
Yes, so I'm Morgan Whitfield Carney. Right now I'm at the British School Al Kubayrat. I'm the academic enrichment lead, and I come from Cranley as well, where I was the head of scholars, head of department humanities, and the head of sixth form. So lots of experience in different areas, but right now I'm really concentrating on high-end challenge and writing a book on gifted and talented, and how that entire field is basically dying and how we should replace it with enrichment.
That's great. Thank you so much, Morgan. When's the book out?
2023. You'll get notice.
Thank you. Alex, if we could come to you next, please.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alex Gray. I am the head of science at Dubai British School, Emirates Hills. And as well as being that, I suppose my current passion and interest that I find myself doing a lot is through YouTube and trying to educate, sort of influence and inspire educators through content creation. So whether that's talking about living internationally, or whether it's going through actually different facets of, let's say, cognitive science or visible thinking skills, just trying to make it that professional development is easy and accessible for teachers.
Brilliant, thank you, Alex. And I would urge anybody to check out Alex's channel. You can find it on YouTube, Deep Teaching. And I think it's only fair to say that listening to our four panelists introduce themselves, what a wonderful array of experience and skills they do have. And I'm looking forward to your insights, ladies and gents, on today's feature. I'm going to dive straight in then with the first discussion. Now we've got our introductions out of the way. The first question then is, how has the role of the educator changed in recent years? And I'm going to come to Natasha first, please.
Yeah, it's just so funny actually, because I was just thinking about this, because I'm listening to all of us panelists, okay, and we're all in education, we all come from an educational background, and we all have about 5 million different things that we're doing, and all of the plates that we're spinning, and we all are obviously super passionate about all of those things. And I think that just really sums up what education is now. It isn't just, the expectation of being in the classroom and teaching children. I suppose it depends on who you are and how you are, but I feel that there is also an expectation from us, especially if you've got positions or you've got opportunities, to be out there and support other educators in developing. I feel that definitely my role has been steered in that direction, being in a school, having people coming up to you, asking questions, etc. I don't, and it's not something you do begrudgingly. It's something you do passionately. And actually, it feels like now the day job and working in a school is just kind of has equal measure to all of the other stuff that I'm doing outside of school as well. So that, I would say, has been the biggest shift. In schools, we are educating children, but actually there's a host of other things that we're doing outside of that as well. Alongside the stuff we are doing in schools, which just isn't the academic, and yes, social came onto it, but it's a lot of the mental health stuff now that we're doing. It's a lot of the wellbeing work that we're doing in schools as well, and educating educators as to the impact that everything we do has on children and the staff that we have in our schools. The DEI work I'm doing, for example, that's been something that's come up over time, and it's definitely something I'm advocating more at the moment. But it wasn't something that we really even tackled previously, and now it is something that we're like, hang on, we have to do this. This is safeguarding work now. It needs to be something that we're doing in schools. Jump in, help me out here.
I think there's lots of nodding from our panelists there as well. Alex, I'll come to you, because I know some of the things that you have been involved in recent years. What's your take on?
See, I was again thinking about this, going back to when I first started teaching, and then what it was like even for me being a student. And I mean, that was some time ago. But in terms of how I perceived my teachers, kind of thought about, well, who influenced me, who inspired me? And kind of touching on what Natasha said, it's like those are the two key things now in terms of the role of educators, I think fall under inspiration and influence. And I can kind of say that previously I kind of felt that, holistic was there, but not as much as what it once was. In terms of now, we talk about a modern educator, the role of the modern educator. It's not actually about just being a teacher, it's about being a facilitator. And I even saw the term a leader of learning. And when I remember when I was training to teach, it was a case of you as the teacher, you're stood at the front. And now it's a case of when you go in and you watch outstanding or high performance teaching, what you want to see is, you don't want to see that. You don't want the teacher to literally be the ringmaster. You want them to be in and around and for that student agency. So the role of the educator has completely changed. And then in terms of how do you accomplish that, when we talk about, so myself in terms of digital skills and the role of trying to inspire and influence through the use of digital skills or communication, it's no longer just a case of, I remember when I first started going, right, can you use a PowerPoint? Yes, great. It is so much more to it than that now, in terms of even, I talked the other day about actually thinking about, can you de-innovate? That crest of the wave that we're on regarding post-COVID, can you de-innovate a little bit? So the skill sets have increased, I think, and then the roles have actually broadened themselves, like the holistic side of mental health to coaching to empathy to, I do have to actually input some information to you as well. It's kind of all encompassing.
And those soft skills as well, I think, have been something that have taken a big a big change in what we're having to deliver now. It was something that never came up in my training, for example. It was like, this is what English, math, whatever it might be. I mean, I was trained on this primary strategy, and that was like an hour lesson and 10-minute. And actually there was nothing about soft skills. There was nothing about teaching children to be collaborative, or how can they become independent in their learning. And exactly what Alex said there, like that flip on, you're not up there being a performing monkey, you're on the back end of it and facilitating the children taking a lead in their learning. Completely different to the way we thought it was going to be.
I think that there's a large part of that down to access to lots of forms of research. I thank you very much, though. Before we move on to the next question, we've got a few questions that have come in from our viewers. Alex, could you just tell us what innovate means, please?
So it was a term. I was at a conference, so a collab one the other week, and one of the ICT teachers. So it's a term we were talking about in terms of when we're thinking about sort of the use of technology and implementation within schools. At the moment, and even when I arrived in the UAE, innovation was that term, and it was blended into a lot of the frameworks. And the challenge really is, what do we mean by the term innovate? And I gave a talk. I was talking about this yesterday, and I was actually thinking about, well, 4 characteristics, but actually to de-innovate means stop looking to try and make things better, stop trying just to use technology for the sake of using technology, and actually question the why, and go, do I need to use technology to achieve or enhance student learning? And if the answer is no, do what you've always done. And that's probably one of the biggest skills. Like for me, when I started teaching in 2006, and ever since then, that plateau of technology, use of technology, and we know that COVID has had an impact on that. It's always been, right, what am I good at? And I might be like, I like Neopod, or I like formative, or I'm great on OneNote. It's like, okay, fantastic. But can you achieve the same impact just by talking to the kids? And if the answer is yes, then de-innovate, go back to basics and go, does it have the impact? Yes or no? And then just pick that strategy. So I think it's a case of, if you focus on student learning first, the question then becomes, can I achieve this without technology? If the answer is yes, you always choose that route.
Yeah, that's a really salient point that you've made there, and thank you for a great definition with examples of de-innovating. I think putting the pupils at the centre of it and pedagogy behind that is obviously crucial. Lots of nodding there. We'll move on then. I'm going to come to Kamil first. I'm going to do a bit of a hybrid question here, and then Morgan, I'm going to come to you after, if that's okay. I was going to ask you, how has the skill set changed in the last sort of 20 years? We've touched on it slightly with Natasha and Alex. If we could make it a hybrid with one of the questions from the Q&A about 21st century education practice around curriculums. Kamil, any thoughts on that?
So I'll try and sort of make my answer very contextual to the sort of context of Pakistan and the developing countries, so that we can understand it a bit more. So now the context is that there are two forces which are acting upon the education model. While the education model has the skills and the different roles that we take as educators, there's a lot of pressure that's coming in on the education model from the society as well, right? The society has a general obsession with an outcome-oriented approach. It has an obsession with grades. So that affects the education model a lot. And the education model in itself, it was designed for the industrial needs, and it has a tendency to produce factory workers and to produce students who have a tendency to be obedient, and it is very transactional in nature. So once you have an overarching model, and in a society which has an obsession with grades, it becomes very difficult to sort of learn and implement new skills which are relevant towards the 21st century. So I believe the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, was a wonderful opportunity for us to learn. And I think it was genuinely a wake-up call as well for us to understand, to really reinvent the model and understand the model a bit better. But I see that we're still sort of sticking to the education inertia of the past 200 years, which designed, the education model in itself. Which reminds me of like a course that I took at university, and we studied about a book called The Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire. And he talked about the banking method of education. And in the banking method of education, the teacher had all of the knowledge which she possessed, and her responsibility was to transfer this knowledge in the students who are considered as passive recipients of that knowledge, and most of the times ignorant. And then they were judged on their capacity to reproduce that knowledge or whatever was being transferred. So it's very transactional. It was and it still is very transactional in nature. So, what should we look at? I believe we should rather look at the education model in itself. And the education model should be a problem posing education model so that it cultivates the sort of skills that we require. For example, curiosity is a skill which students need to possess. So, in a problem posing education model, the students need to be curious of the world around them. They don't need to just look at things, they need to see things on how things are happening. So it starts with curiosity. And then critical thinking skills are very important for them to first see the problems and then critically evaluate the problems in terms of different options and different solutions that can come up of the same problem. So critical thinking skills are crucial. And then creativity as a skill, which we're trying to implement it in the school as well. They need to come up with creative solutions so that we can reimagine a better present and reimagine a better future in the meanwhile as well. While us as educators in this particular model, our role is to provide that safe space for the children to have skills of resilience, to believe in their ideas, so that not only they can visualize them and they can implement them as well. And I think if we do that, then our worries of the future would rather be taken care by the children themselves.
I think that's a really important point that you've made there about how skills are changing over time. I know something that I kind of regularly look at is the World Economic Forum's top 10 skills for the future. I think Morgan was like, yeah, I was going to say that. Morgan, if I could come to you next, is there anything you'd like to add to that question?
Yeah, so my brain is kind of exploding because there are so many different parts that we can take from all the answers so far. So I was thinking about kind of two questions that have kind of been asked. So I think Kamil's point when he's talking about the role of education in the 21st century and how we have structured our education systems is very flawed. So I think that one of the biggest purposes of education that we have to reframe is this idea that we educate in order to kind of give skills that we can then help to employ people in jobs. And instead, we have to look at education explicitly as a social justice project. That there are so many inequalities that exist and so much inequity between groups that one of the purposes of education is to kind of break those cycles of social immobility and help make all students, no matter where they are coming from, succeed and create a more inclusive society. And that's a huge ask of education, but I think it's something that we are now starting to see as part of our role. Some things might be outside of our control, but definitely within our influence to make sure that we're tackling those. And it means asking those big questions. Are we too reliant on a system that is all about exams? Are we missing something when it comes to tackling things, differences between groups? The pandemic was amazing at really laying that bare, because all of a sudden when we had something like teacher assessed grades, we could really see that the difference between selective and non-selective schools was incredibly evident. And the structures that we had in place were perpetuating that inequity. And there was a lot of fuss kicked up about it. And I think that was a good thing, because we were then all of a sudden forced to pay attention to something that was structurally wrong within the system. In terms of skills, I think that what Alex was saying about like the whole idea of digital strategy, there's no such thing as digital strategy, it's just strategy. And we have all these wonderful whiz-bang tools, but we still want to be able to operate our classrooms the same way as if we were in the middle of a blackout, that no matter what, we could still have an incredible lesson. And I was thinking that the biggest skill for teachers is not like this kind of digital literacy or understanding how to use these tools, but instead it's collaboration. So collaboration in this big way that now as teachers, we can crowdsource ideas, we can share resources, we can work together across the world and create new things, research projects together. But also on the micro level, there's a huge push within schools for collective teacher efficacy. We're creating smaller, better groups that are looking at data, that are making great decisions, and have this real belief in the positive difference that we can make on our students when we're working together. So I think on that level, I think collaboration is the number one skill that technology enables, but definitely we are now as educators enhancing.
So I think we're all in agreement that from the nodding there that education is moving towards that kind of social justice. We need to develop skills. Are we not just adding more to educators' plates? I'm just playing devil's advocate here. With this in mind, then, what would you like to see as non-negotiables in the future of education, and why? I'm going to come to Alex first on this, and then.
It's one of those things, I think, again, Morgan touched on it about assessments or exams. And I think going down, obviously from us as the British curriculum, we look at some of the information that comes out from OCR, for example, or the trials that are taking place in the UK now, where it's gone, right, we'll go and do examinations on laptops. And even the chief of OCR a couple of years ago went, you know what, it's pointless having exams where students are retrieving information. It's much better to give them, let's say, questions with a device and show the skill set of being able to find and make sense of information. So something like that would be good. But I think a lot of teachers, from a British perspective, at some point would go, you know what, let's go to a GPA, a grade point average, like the American system, that gives us greater control over being able to go, look, over the course of a year, your skill sets, so we can assess skill sets. We can almost like the NYP do, go, right, we're going to give you these projects where we're going to grade you against skill sets and these rubrics and criterion, rather than just how good were you on that day. And that's the issue with a lot of the exams. And we're feeling it now from secondary with these students coming out from examinations going, why was the point of that pre-release information? You know, no offense. If we've all been on Twitter, AQA over the weekend, you know, a physics paper, it's like, okay, so what was the point of it? And it's only through learning from hindsight. And it seems like we as teachers want to change, but examination boards that make a lot of money off this probably don't want us to. And that's what's really stifling us and holding us back, is that we're kind of shackled to that. And if we could do away with it and go, right, we want a system that allows us to do these things over the course of 2 years, like a coursework or a GPA or a skills, or something where students can demonstrate over a longer period of time, get feedback and improve, something like that for me actually would be, in 10 years time to have, would be fantastic.
I think that's hugely important. Morgan, if we could come to you next, please.
I think it's really interesting because I come from the Canadian system, but I've spent my entire career teaching in the British system. And in the Canadian system, we do have that approach. And I think it's really worthwhile noting that the amount of pressure that we put on students. Today, I just came from a department meeting where we were talking about a year 7 student who just fell apart today during her exams. And we were just like, well, why are we having our year 7s do full exam cycles? They are beside themselves. They've been preparing for it for the past month. The emotional stress is not equal to the skills, which perhaps we could say are the revision skills that they might need for the future. In fact, we're really kind of hammering into them that this is rote learning, that it is something that they have to learn how to study, but it's not. It's not a true assessment of their skills, this end of year exam that we're giving them. And in fact, we're putting them through the ringer, and I'm not quite sure what for. And I think those are big questions. So when we think, okay, should we recommend that year 7s and 8s don't have exams next year in the school? That seems like a very obvious and simple thing to do. We'd have more teaching time. We'd add so much more exploration time in the curriculum, be incredibly powerful. But for some reason, I think sometimes we're very beholden to either government policies, exam board policies, and also what we just expect has been done in the past should continue. And I think questioning those larger structures should be something that teachers should feel empowered to do, because it is so important. We're at a point that what we're teaching sometimes isn't even relevant. As a teacher of the humanities, I always find it very, very frustrating that the humanities is taught from a position like where it's very ethnocentric. We're teaching things that don't actually reflect the global students that I teach and what they need to learn actually to move around the world every single day. So I think asking those big questions and kind of forcing change, I think we have a large enough platform and voice that teachers can do so.
I think with that as well, because we have assessment weeks in our school, and we changed it this year. Instead of having 3 assessment weeks for 7, 8, and 9, we minimized it to 2 for that effect, for that purpose. And we said, look, here's the evidence, here's the testing effect. Now, everyone's going retrieval practice. There's great evidence. Let's do low stakes, high frequency. And we as teachers were like, yeah, great. But do you know who the people were that complained or didn't like that? Parents.
Parents, yes. Yes.
We're trying to say to you, look, there's evidence here to support decreasing this, and it's going to be better for your children. And there was, yeah, but I want to know how they're doing. And it goes back to the idea of when we were in school or when they were in school, what they were accustomed to, and they don't like change. It's like same with the textbook. No textbook? No, we can do it. We're fine with now digital. It's like, yeah, but when I was in school, there was a textbook. Yeah, and that's the problem we're facing a lot of the times.
So with some of those kind of threads involved then, and our wishes for non-negotiables in the future of education and why, like how do we get there? And what could we do, fast forwarding sort of 20 years, to make that our new normal? And if I can come to Natasha first, please.
Yeah, it's so funny listening to all of this because I'm obviously primary based. So I have a lot of flexibility with what I can and can't do. So I've completely pulled away from this kind of assessment cycle and forcing children to do assessments at the end and all of that, because actually what is the impact on children's learning? And it's just been really, really interesting having these conversations, because I think that what are the non-negotiables? The non-negotiables are we as educators need to start putting our foot down with policymakers, and we need to start saying, well, actually, what do our children need and what do we need to do in order to get there? And quite frankly, once those things are in place, our parents will go with the flow. They will then understand, but we need to make it clear to them. And I think leaders in schools need to be a little bit brave and start making some of those bigger decisions. And start telling parents, well, actually, because parents just want to hear logic, and they want to hear that their children are going to be able to succeed when they become adults. Like their whole thing is, look, I'm investing into this little person that I brought into the world, and I want them to do well because that proves that I'm a good parent. And so by giving them a good education, they're going to be well-rounded individuals when they leave. But us as educators need to tell our parents, well, do you know what? This is what they're going to need when they leave school. This is what we need to be able to give them, because like we've just said there, what are those skills of the future that these children are going to need? It's not going to be what you needed 20 years ago. Just like Kamil said, our education system was built around, industry. You had robots going through, operating machinery because there were these skills that they needed to have. That's not what we need now. I speak to my daughter who is 20. She's like, Mum, can I find the job that I can do that earns me the most money in the shortest amount of time from my laptop on the sofa? So, and obviously that's in all of our dream. But that ultimately is, there are jobs out there that have that, and she was not given any skills at school in order to be able to fulfill that as a dream. So what are we doing about that? I was listening to this, and we're talking about GCSEs and IGCSEs and this and that and blah blah blah, but actually in the curriculum, so we follow the British National Curriculum in my school, but we have it alongside IPC, and IPC is skills based. It's not knowledge based, because ultimately, it was funny actually. I had a child today say to me, well, Mrs. Hilton, why do I need to know the Roman numerals? And I looked at her and I was like, do you know what? I don't know, because when are you going to actually use them? And the reality is, I said, my response was, well, do you know what? Sometimes, when you get a clock and the Roman, and she was like, well, I won't buy a clock with Roman numerals. I'll buy one with numbers. And I just was like, do you know what? She's arguing with me here, and I do not even have an argument, because she's totally right. We're teaching them knowledge that they don't ever need to have, and it's a waste of their time and a waste of our time. And I will spend 2 hours doing this, and actually, what's the point? The skills, which is what I think we're all in agreement, is what our children are going to need when they progress into the future. But our exams aren't aligned with that, or the qualifications at the end aren't aligned. The EPQ that I've seen, the extended project, that looks a little bit more in that direction. IB looks a little bit more in that direction, where they've got all of these skills which build up to a project, which actually then can get them into the universities. And they're doing something that they're invested in, because actually it's a project of their choice, and they then demonstrate all of those skills. I think as educators, we need to be brave, and we need to be steering policymakers in that direction. What skills do our children need? And then we need to produce something at the end, like the EPQ, that our children can then go off and say, well, I can do this. These are the skills I have. And that can then be applied to anything I take on in the future.
Thank you, Natasha. Kamil, coming to you next. Anything to add, or can I move on to the next question?
It's interesting because we've talked a lot about skills, and we've talked a lot about the curriculum, and we've talked a lot about the pedagogical practices and the assessments as well. There's one thing that I'd like to add to the conversation, and that, when I was thinking about this conversation, there was a word called future in this conversation. We were talking about the future. And when I started visualizing the future, I thought that, it's very difficult to predict it. And specifically with the pandemic coming up, our predictions sort of, completely sort of take a different turn altogether. One thing that I genuinely think that schools need to have and focus on is a value-based school culture as well. Like, we're forgetting that, the culture is of paramount importance, because that is how things really get done. And I'm talking about values of integrity. I'm talking about values of care. I'm talking about values of compassion, awareness, responsibility, empathy. I think these values are missing, and I think these values are not a part of the conversation as well. For example, one of the child was asking me, like, in life we face problems, and whenever we face a particular problem, how do we decide? How do I make the decision of which route to take, right? So I always say that figure out and evaluate what your values are, and your values are going to give you the answer for that particular problem that you're facing. Because a lot of the times, the problems that we face, and if we refer to the value of responsibility, we will find that we are in a position to handle these problems. A lot of the times, when we refer to the value of integrity, we will realize that, all right, there are two ways to go about it, but this is the right way to do things. Might just be the most difficult one, but the value of integrity is going to guide you that this is the right thing to do. So I think that conversation of integrating these values within the school is something, we should talk about as well.
Yeah, I think that that's one of the really important attributes, I think, around leadership, is that values-based decision making, because it always centers you back to your core mission and your core purpose within education. Thinking then about all of the things that you've discussed already, and with educators being ever accessible online at what can feel like at all times, how can educators really switch off and find a balance when it's no secret, listening to all of the things that the panelists are involved in, how do you find balance when the prevailing narrative is that, we should be lifelong learners, we need to be accessible, we need a social profile, we need to do our jobs, we need to be involved in outside organisations to help drive our own culture and outcomes in our schools, as well as grow ourselves. Kamil, if I can come to you first on that, what are your top tips for switching off, finding balance?
Interestingly, my parents asked me exactly the same question as well, like, when do you switch off? And I've been thinking about it.
Frozen, so I'm going to, or maybe I've frozen. Have I frozen?
No.
Natasha, can I come to you next then?
Oh, I can hear Kamil.
Yeah, I can.
Can you guys hear me?
Sorry, I
can't.
Carry on.
Okay. So basically, I've been thinking about this term like work-life balance, and it really depends on how do you define that balance. For a lot of people, that balance just might be work. So work might be bringing in that balance in their lives. So we shouldn't have a one-size-fits-all approach here. And our approach should rather be process-oriented. I know it comes with its pressures, but then again, if we surrender to the process, and this is something which my mentor keeps on repeating week on week with me as well, just surrender to the process. Just start enjoying the process. The outcomes are not in your control. You can never really have a perfect school. And even if I open like 20 schools in the same city, it is going to be less. So, in our sort of journey of perfection, we tend to forget that having a process-oriented approach is very important, and being lifelong learners is a part of having that process-oriented approach. I don't think there's anything wrong about it. It's just that we have to create that balance.
Morgan, if I can jump to you next, because I know that this is something that you're hugely passionate about.
By hugely passionate, Olly means I said, I'm so excited you want to come to me for this question because I have so much to say. So I like the idea of being a lifelong learner. I think that being a lifelong learner, definitely that's part of our job as teachers. Otherwise it becomes rote and boring. But I hate this idea of well-being because so often we frame well-being as, how do you teachers take care of your well-being? We shouldn't have to. Teachers should never be responsible for their own well-being because it means that we have to constantly push back. We have to push back against burnout and hero culture in a school. We have to push back and say, these are the limitations. Or we have to push back and say, I don't want to do yoga. Well-being is so much more than that. Well-being is kind of taking kindness and codifying it. It's taking kindness that we expect to be there and putting it into our policies. And I think that could be an example I always use is when I was pregnant. I was 9 months pregnant and I was out doing a duty in the hot sun. Individual teachers would come up and they'd relieve me and they'd send me back inside. But codifying that to say teachers that are 7+ months pregnant should not have to do duties outside. Putting that in a policy, that's how you make sure that teachers never have to feel guilty if they have to ask for something. And I think that goes along with everything. It's the school's structures and policies that create wellness, that create a culture of wellness. So it should be things like having creches before and after school, staff creches, so that teachers can very much then attend meetings after school and not have to worry about pickups. They know that their children are taken care of. It allows them to work and then create a boundary between work and their home life. It allows them to work better. And things like communication boundaries. We are expected to be accessible at all times. I work at a school currently where we have very strict email curfews. At 3:30, no emails go out. If you want an email to go out, you schedule send it so that it will be received in the morning. No emails on weekends. And email windows so that parents do not expect teachers to answer right away. Teachers answer in 2 working days. They do not answer emails at all on the weekend. And really enforcing that with staff, it is such a huge difference. Because in the past, I have definitely been bathing my 2-year-old in a bath and answering emails frantically on the bathroom floor whilst I did that. And I had no problem getting an email at 2:00 in the morning and answering it because I thought that that was normal. And culture eats strategy for breakfast. We need to be able to create a culture. And that means creating policies that protect our staff. And I think we often think that's staff being greedy, but it's not. That's what's better for the organization. We are more productive, more efficient. And the most important thing, if you have a good culture where you're protecting staff's well-being, is that then they are fully present in the classroom. They are not distracted. They are not checking emails. They are not worrying about other admin that's being foisted upon them. Instead, they are there in the classroom doing what they do best, which is being present for kids, and that improves the quality of teaching and learning. And that's the actual outcome that you want. So I think when you create the structures that protect teachers, you are functioning so much better as a school overall.
Mm.
And that's really resonated by a comment that we've got in the Q&A section from Jenny. Thank you, Jenny. She says, interesting point about integrating culture and integrity in the discussion. We should really be educating people to be humans, right? We keep on forgetting that's the original and the ultimate pursuit of education. And how can we do that if we aren't, living by those values ourselves in our schools. So thank you so much for that comment there, Jenny. I'm going to open it out because I think this is a really valuable point, especially with kind of the rise of technology and the strategy. We won't call it the digital strategy. So I'll open it to anyone in the panel, really. How can we ensure our own well-being in that ever-increasing online world and digital marketplace?
I'll go.
Go on.
Man. Just resonating. I think it's all about obviously trying to offer out to people is about self-awareness, and obviously listening to all the different panelists and some of the things. It's like I'm a big advocate of culture. My background predominantly is in sport, as in team sport, is rugby, and culture in that aspect is a big thing, and it's about trust because you are trusting your teammates. And even when it comes to training, especially with that, you're trusting the people around you. And when you play a game, believe it or not, having suffered horrendous injuries, you are trusting the people you play against in that respect as well, in terms of skill levels, and you play within a boundary of things. So culture and trust are huge things, and when it comes to well-being, I think it's, especially in the age we live in, I think it's very much that everyone is individual. And it's more about, I think for me, it's about establishing a self-awareness. So for me, my sort of release, as it were, is I will still go and play touch rugby on the weekend. I'll go and coach rugby. And my other passion is photography and videography. But that kind of ties back into a little bit about learning. And I think the learning component of it is okay to go, you know what? I enjoy learning about my profession in my own time. Some people don't, which is why we have PD time to try and encompass everyone. But some of us do like to go off and have those other things. Some of us want to learn new skills. And I think it's that Maslow's hierarchy of needs. When you get to the very top, it's about creativity. It goes back to what Kamil said earlier about children, creativity and curiosity. It's like children have those naturally. It's not that they lose them through school. It's we as teachers stop, basically, we take it away from them. And so in terms of that well-being, I would say encourage staff to have a passion project, encourage staff out of their comfort zones. So in the culture where you've got trust and safe space, you can actually go, right, guys, you're all going to go, and Miss over here is going to lead an art class for you or a singing class. We're going to go do some PE, badminton, and actually integrate trust and communication and cooperation, all these things we talk about, but it's a different culture, in terms of, and I'm sure loads of people out here, but if you want to go, Culture Code, Daniel Coyle, go read From Good to Great, about business acumen, about great teams, what makes a great team. And they generally bang on about the same things, why the Navy SEAL is so good, all these different teams, why this good, why these business insiders so good. Morgan, you're laughing, but it's true. It's like there's transferable skill sets that we as educators can learn from that. But culture does not seem to be a word that's always associated with the very tops of our schools, because it's a case of, well, hang on a minute, that's not necessarily tying into, results and fees, because we're international and we're all fee paying and those things. So it's a balance, it's a trade-off for us as teachers when we talk about well-being, in terms of, I want to give back to my kids, but at the same time, it's like the only way I can do that is if I'm refreshed and at my best as well.
Do you know what? It's so funny, actually, because all of this, in summary, we need to look at the leaderships within schools, though. That's what it boils down to, doesn't it? It boils down to the leadership and what the leadership is doing, and the model that they're giving out as well. But it's really, so I was in a school where it was no emails after a certain time, but then you do have staff that would bother more because they need to be able to send it, but having that the timer on their emails to be able to go out, so meeting everybody's needs is really important. But it's the leadership, it's the top end of that school, making sure they're modeling it and making sure that everybody has the opportunity there. So as soon as I came here to my school, I was like, look, we need a wellbeing team put in place, because it doesn't mean that as a leader I have to physically do it myself, but I need to make sure that there is a system in place in order for people's needs to be met. So we put a wellbeing team together, and then it was their job to sit down, ask the staff what they need, what could we do to support, not just a donut once every now and then to, make people quiet and go, well, look, I've given you a donut, you need to be happy now. But they need to sit down, they need to organize these things, because like what are the staff saying? Like, they know the temperature of what the staff are feeling just as much as we think we're on the ground and we're, actually, are people feeling really overworked at the moment? Have they been pulled from pillar to post at this point in time? Do I need to know that I need to pull back and say, well, actually, we don't need to do that right now? And like Morgan said, having those policies and practices in place, like we have that. Staff respond after 2 days. They don't respond with outside working hours. They're not allowed to respond to an email after 3 o'clock. And by putting those in place, they don't feel obliged to do that. One of the questions I saw pop up here was somebody had said, but in this really kind of like competitive educational market where people are constantly trying to prove themselves, etc. Do you know what? Actually, I think that's where you need to make a decision about the type of place you want to be in and the culture that you want to be in. You have to go into, when you're being interviewed for a role, you're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you. Yeah, is that the type of place you want to be in? You have to make that decision. If they're expecting you to work till 7 in the evening and be on call all weekend, well, actually, does that align with your values and the way you see, yourself working at the best? And if it doesn't, then you don't need to be there. Find somewhere where it is the right place to be.
Yeah, and I found for mine, and again, but I've got 2 young kids. So when it comes to, let's say, school finishes, and I was leaning off because they're going off to gymnastics now, so I had to push them out the door. But it's like my time between, let's say, 3:30 and maybe 5 o'clock, that's family time. Now, what works for me is I want to then be able to do 5:30 till 7. I want to be able to send out my emails then. You don't have to answer them, but at least I know I'm ticking things off my list that are important for me, even if it's a case of, right, I'll set it for tomorrow, whatever it needs to be. But I think for schools, it's like you can't stifle everybody.
No.
From a parental response, in terms of when parents or when teachers respond, emails over weekends, but you kind of go, but don't have them on your phone, guys, either. That's the one thing we're all guilty of. Take it off your phone. And then it's like, right, but on a working day, would you respond in your profession, whatever that may be, to an email outside of office hours? Well, no, they don't. So why expect us to as well? But there is that high expectation of it. So you're right. You set the parameters, you set the expectations, but allow your staff to be individuals because their circumstances are all different.
I've been facing a few technical difficulties, as you will have seen, but it really resonates. I just want to give a shout out to Lisa Grace Wilson, who is tuning in. Thanks, Lisa.
Oh, hi, Lisa.
She's the editorial director of Teach Middle East magazine, and she works with loads of teachers, 45,000 teachers effectively. She says that she finds some schools really controlling, that they stifle the creativity or even their best teachers. She's had teachers tell her that their school stopped them from speaking and writing externally, even though they're writing for a platform which is shining a spotlight on that particular school, that institution, which can only be a good thing. It puts you out there as being what we talked about before, about being a collaborator, wanting to work with other educators. And she says it's crazy. We're supposed to be fostering creativity. We're going to move on then to a question. Kamil, I'm going to come to you first, please, if that's okay. The latest statistic that I read said that there's been an increase by more than 60% in new international schools across the world. How can educators leverage their skills in what is a really in-demand workforce?
So at school, I'm that sort of principle that whenever I have to sort of get a teacher on board, I genuinely believe that the quality of the school cannot exceed the quality of the teachers. So it's of paramount importance to get the right teachers on board, right? So whenever I'm thinking, and the conversations that I'm having in these interviews is about 3 things. The first is about, educators, they really need to reinvent themselves. They need to sort of, know the latest trends in research. They need to know about the research, the pedagogical practices. They need to attend conferences. They need to attend seminars. They need to sort of really reinvent themselves. The second thing that, is a lot of the teachers, a lot of the educators, especially with 60% of the international schools that they're coming in, they come up with their new approaches, they come up with new things and a lot of creativity. So they need to unlearn whatever they've learned over the years. a lot of the times what they've learned is very traditional in nature as well. So they need to be very flexible, and they need to unlearn whatever they've learned over the years. And the third thing is what Natasha really talked about. We need to really, in order to avoid being burned out, we need to understand, educators need to understand what their values are and what are the values of the institutions, may it be any international school, may it be any local school, may it be any online model that they're joining. They need to know that what are the values of that particular institute and what are their values, and is there a clear alignment of values? If yes, then that international school or any place would be the right place for you. Otherwise, you're looking at burnout.
That's absolutely brilliant. I love how you brought it back to values there. Natasha, can I come to you next, please, just for your insights on that question?
Yeah, I think really, really similar to what Kamil's just said there as well. I think that we need to. It's really difficult because we're talking about having a work-life balance, and but also you need to be able to upskill yourself. You need to be on top of all of this stuff, and especially if you're kind of like new to the profession, it does become quite overwhelming because you feel like you're in constant competition to keep on top of your game. And I feel like I'm about to dip into something, Olly, that I know you'll touch on a bit later. But right, put it this way: I don't have. Right, I mostly do have time, and I waste a lot of time watching things like Netflix. Absolutely, I do. But I am a parent. I'm working. I've got lots and lots of stuff going on, and I definitely most probably should exercise more, and all of this other stuff I should do. But I'm definitely not someone that's sitting there reading hundreds of books or doing lots of research. But I definitely have worked out a really easy way of getting to know things and being on top of my game through quick fixes. And honestly, technology and social media has been a lifesaver for me. I literally know that I can go onto Twitter and find a summary of almost everything that's going on in the world in less than 500 words. Because people are talking about it, people are tweeting about it, and I can generally get a good feel of what's going on. And that is my secret way of keeping on top of stuff. Because genuinely, like, I would prefer to watch something on TV as opposed to reading an educational book. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to pretend that's not the case. that is me. So I've had to work out how I can make sure that I do keep on top of my game. And that is the way I do it, Olly. It might sound a bit of a cop-out and a bit of a lazy way to do it, but Twitter is my friend.
It's working smart, I think, given the situation. Like, there's no feasible way that you can keep up with. I mean, the rate that research is published, the rate that books are published, these days, there's no way that you can do all of those things, have a life, monitor your own well-being, be a family person without that. A good friend of mine, Mark Anderson at ICT Evangelist, coined Twitter as the best staff room in the world. You can talk to someone, you can find out exactly what you want to find out, whether it's to speak to the researcher, to speak to the author, or to just find those one-page summaries. So as we all are.
Education Endowment Foundation, that's like, because when you go on there and all of the research they have on there, they will always have like an A4 summary of what's going on in general. If there's like any big pieces of research, that's always been a quick fix for me as well. Like, I'll always find the easiest, quickest way to get through stuff for people as well.
It's working smart, as I've said, and there's a great educator that's distilling one-page summaries at Expat Educator on Twitter. He produces loads of stuff. I don't know how he has the time to do it, but he does. How then and why should schools leverage us as educators, Alex?
I had to look at that when you asked me. I was like, leveraging us as educators. What does that really entail? And I dived into it, and I've got this written down. It says, using what you're good at to get more of what they want, basically. And I think across schools, there is a vast wealth of skill sets and knowledge, untapped. And a lot of the time you just don't know about it because people aren't always screaming it from the rooftops because, as we've already established, pretty busy doing other things, and actually from a school, and I think from a culture coaching perspective, it's like, you need to know the strengths of your staff. And I think if you can identify the strengths, then you can really tap into how can we use the strengths of our staff to really either maximize student experience or promote us in a way that puts us out there in the field. So for my example is, as I already mentioned, like videography, YouTube, photography. So that's my passion, and I'd like to think I'm okay at it. So my school go, right, we've got these events on, can you come and photograph it for us? Happy to. So I'm now on the school's Instagram. Can you come and video this for us? Yep. So I'm now on the school YouTube, and I can push those things out that sell the school in that respect. So that's a unique skill set. But then what we do is we kind of go, right, what about your enrichment activities? All right, guys, let's do an enrichment activity about setting up and creating YouTube. Let's do an enrichment activity about photography and all those different things. Because kind of start then talking about innovation, because you can go, you don't need this 20,000 dirham SLR to take great photos. Here's your phone. Let me show you how you can use this. And off they go. And it's accessible to everyone. And you're just leveraging those skill sets about what you're passionate about, what you think your strengths are, as you say, what you're good at, to get more out of what they want. And it's the idea of inspiration and influence, as it were, improving certain skills, the returns that the school will get from this and that you get from this. And the idea of then why you would leverage it even further is for connections. So it's an example of, like in school sets, why might you take on a certain individual to come and work at your school? Now, you mentioned Mark. Why might I want to connect with Mark? He's got 50,000 followers on Twitter. If I'm connected with him, that what he brings as a power of influence and inspiration, as well as a wealth of knowledge, that's a really good idea of using what they're strong at, using what they're passionate about to maximize what we get out of it as well. I think it's also being very careful with it, as you say, about balance and making sure that it's, teachers are willing and wanting to use and develop those skill sets and then do it for the benefit of the schools, because otherwise you fall into that nature of, whose intellectual property is this? And we've all been in those contracts where it goes, whatever you make is property of the school afterwards. And it's like, well, hang on a minute. But it's the fine balance of it. And I think it's a case of working with them to identify what you're passionate, what you're good at, and helping enrich that to get something out of it. So it's a mutualistic relationship.
Morgan, you were nodding along there, and I know that you have some experience in this area and work with some sort of external organisations. Do you want to share a little bit on this?
I just think it's really interesting. Alex and Kamil touched on this too, but Alex actually mentioned Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I think that's actually really fascinating because I just recently learned this. So Maslow, before he created his hierarchy of needs, he actually went and lived with the Blackfoot First Nations people, and he kind of appropriated or stole a lot of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs from them. But he missed they call it the Maslow's, they call it the teepee. He missed the very top of the teepee. So he stopped at self-actualization is what we're all reaching for. But the Blackfoot, the very top of their pyramid is community actualization. So it's how we work together as a community to actually accomplish these things. And I think that kind of is what we're all speaking about. Those are values that we have in the community. This is what we can all bring together. This is how we create greatness, by utilizing each other's skill sets. It's only when we work together that we have those value systems where we can become better people. Our students can become better people as well. So when you kind of embrace all that in the culture of a school, it becomes really, really powerful. So yeah, I thought that was so interesting.
If I can come to Kamil then, what role can organisations play in this, and us as educators, to make sure that we do affect change so that there isn't a future skills gap in education?
Yeah, I genuinely think that the future has to be based on partnerships and collaborations. And these partnerships can happen within the same industry and outside of the industry as well. I'll give you an example. Like, we as a school, we're a Swedish school. So as far as an external organization is concerned, we partner with an organization called the Swedish Business Council. So you have all of the Swedish companies there. And when I was interacting with the heads of the companies, I thought, you've got medical benefits, you've got transportation benefits, you've got all sorts of benefits, but nobody's talking about education benefits. So why don't we partner together? And I offer the children of your employees certain exclusive packages with reference to enrollment in the school. And it becomes all the more easier for us to explain them the culture of the school, because the organizations have a Swedish culture as well, and we have a Swedish culture in the school too. So it is and we are creating a win-win situation in that regard. Helps both of us. And now, if we talk about partnerships and collaborations within the same industry, there are a few online models that we've adopted. Like Class Dojo is one of the applications. I'm not sure whether you guys know about it.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's implemented in 95% of the schools in the US. And I genuinely think it's one of the best things that can happen in order to positively reinforce the cultural values. So it's more like a Facebook for school. So it has, the parents coming in and they're connected with the teachers, and the teachers are connected with the students. The students have these cute avatars, and they're rewarded Class Dojo points on positive interactions within the classroom. Whenever they're responsible, they get a Class Dojo point. Whenever they demonstrate leadership, they get a point for that. And it's amazing on how like the students are fighting and they're being competitive for these points. And that sort of really creates a very holistic and a positive culture within the school. A similar sort of a platform I recently, and that is one person I met at GESS Turkey actually, a platform called Global Bridge. And it's amazing how this guy is trying to bridge the gap between education to universities and universities to companies. So he's creating bespoke profiles of students so that their transition from the schools to universities becomes easier, and then the same profiles for the university students so that companies get access to the fresh talent that is coming out of the schools. It helps everyone. So I think we can really learn a lot from life, and life is not a zero-sum game. We can create these win-win situations, and I think this is what the future should look like as well.
That's great. Thank you, Kamil. And I hope that this goes some way towards starting that conversation, whether you're tuning in live, watching back later. We've got 5 different people from 5 different parts of the world in 5 different schools who are all collaborating and sharing their thoughts on this panel today. And I just to sort of summarize then, it's our prerogative, I think, as educators to ensure that we influence in all different aspects of education so that we have equity across the entire education landscape and develop not only our skills, but the skills for students of the future to ensure that not only they have the right facets to succeed in life, but also resilience no matter what they may face. And that starts with us as educators. We need to monitor and look after our own well-being and actually look after the well-being of our students. So we need to model those expectations that we want everybody in our communities to live by. And that needs to be an aligned value system across all of the schools. And the only way to achieve that, as we've heard from our expert panelists today, is by open, honest discussion and collaboration. So I'm mindful of time. We've gone 1 or 2 minutes over. I still got a few questions that we could have asked, but this was scheduled for 1 hour. So I'd just like to say a massive thank you to Kamil, Morgan, Natasha and Alex for a really interesting discussion today. So many different salient points that I'd like to follow up on. So you can watch this webinar back on YouTube. I'm sure Sarah was probably going to say that. She's nodding later on. And if you are wanting to continue the discussion, please search out our panelists on various social media platforms. I'm sure they'd be happy to engage with you. And of course, use the hashtag GESS Talks. Thank you so much, everybody, for a brilliant discussion.
Thank you so much, Olly. That was brilliant. Really thought-provoking. If anyone from the audience has any further questions or wants to connect with our speakers, please send an email to marketing@guesseducation.com, or as Olly said, you can find them on social media. You'll be redirected to a short survey once we end the webinar, so please tell us what you thought and if there are any topics you'd like to hear about. A massive thank you to our panel and also our audience. We hope you found this discussion beneficial and that you enjoy the rest of the day. Take care and bye for now, and we hope to see you soon.